So I've uncovered something pretty interesting. If you know Aphex Twin, you know he creates a ridiculous amount of music. There's the SoundCloud dumps, there's the fact that on his album EPs, they can be songs that were made 10 days ago, some of them are made 10 years ago. There's a lot to get through, but there's only one song that he's made that only he has heard and no one else except for me. And I'm going to give you a live reaction just now, so let's play it. It would be sacrilegious and in some countries illegal to talk about artists who have defined music over the years without mentioning Richard David James, better known as Aphex Twin. In his career that has spanned nearly 3 decades, he has walked the walk and wonked the wonk, creating soundscapes that exist as both comforting homes and frightening abysses for many listeners. In addition to his quality as a musician, Richard is an elusive, sardonic figure, a prankster provocateur that, while not the original At It musician, paved the way with his antics and lore. You see a headline like this and for a second you can believe it's another one to add to the hijinks binder before realising it's a piece of satire. I've been looking forward to reviewing and ranking his work for the longest time now, and I won't wait a moment longer. So hello, I'm Liam, Music Reviewer. Thank you to patrons like Chris Timmons for making what I do possible, and welcome to another entry in the rank series where worst means weakest and best means best. And today we'll be ranking the discography of a man whose smile is as big as his body of work, Aphex Twin. And today I woke up and I decided to choose violence. Clocking in at over 2.5 hours long, Saw Volume 2 isn't just the longest Aphex Twin LP, but one of the longest albums I've heard ever in my life, period. And you may think that the reason it finds itself at the bottom of the pile is due to the fact that the internet has ruined my attention span, and the internet has ruined my attention span. And while you're not wrong about my attention span, the sheer length and size of this album doesn't really factor into my complaints all that much. It more comes down to the quality rather than the quantity when it comes to my gripes. Some songs like the haunted ice cream van jingle that is number 2 meander too much for my liking, never starving me of something to latch onto, but in the grand scheme of things it does feel a tad like eating scraps while most of the album offers a banquet. I wouldn't argue that it could do with some refinement and editing, but I'm not here to take that job on, as it'd be like playing musical Jenga, every song working on the back of the other. So even though I don't care for a few songs on here, it's worth taking a dip in quality here and there if it leads to the whole host of fantastic cuts existing in the first place. Despite being my least favourite Aphex Twin album, I could easily compile the highlights from Saw Volume 2 and it would rival the best work of so many other electronic artists. That's just how good Aphex Twin's weakest record is. And I mean, the opener number 1 just has this feeling of fleeting beauty, which for a song that is 7 minutes long is a ridiculously cool achievement to have. I think when it comes to those just like enchanting plucks, you never quite know when it's the final one, and when you just feel like it's getting to the end, you're just clutching yourself, just begging, just one more time, and I'll be happy for the rest of my life. And yeah, if that's how the album gets started off, granted isn't really emblematic of the mood of the rest of the album, then it sets the bar pretty high. Other highlights that I want to include are number 15, a squelching, squeaking, seeping beauty, and number 16, which is a bit breezy in the context of this album. It's like 4 minutes long, but god does it ensure that it etches in an impression that you won't soon forget. This is the kind of album, sort of like a discography low point, that is the furthest thing from it. It really does make me reconsider putting worst in the titles of these videos, though I will continue to do so because I am a hack. Open your heart and welcome in the loving sounds of I Care Because You Do, featuring the holy sounds of the Waxen Piff, Alberto Balsam, and the dark horse of the Aphex Twin discography. Well, as far as other fan rankings and Rate Your Music are concerned, I Care Because You Do finds itself in a pretty difficult position historically, nestled in between the compelling ambient years of selected ambient works and his unconventional output at the turn of the century. I'd be making my life far easier if I was just to echo the general consensus and just put I Care Because You Do at the bottom, but the fact of the matter is that I've always had a soft spot for this record, and with researching and making this video and returning to it time and time again, that fondness has only got all the more strong. Even though I would say everything from this point on that Richard did is better than I Care Because You Do, that doesn't take away from the sheer quality of this release. I don't know for a fact if I Care Because You Do followed the same lucid dreaming development as Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, but if it were the case, it would not shock me in the slightest. The Waxen Pith is a journey through the woods, every blink bringing you to different terrain, hopping between foreboding and pleasant with those overlooming strings orchestrating your fate. Then there's Ventolin, the moment where the floor falls from underneath you, the battering you taking your way down being represented by that piercing synth screech. Then there's your ultimate fate at the bottom of what seemed like a never-ending descent, a rave in the middle of nowhere in the form of Come On You. That aforementioned piercing synth is now a laser that bounces around as one of Richard's best drum sequences helps to amp up the mood enough to distract you from the unshakable feeling that you're still not that safe. I would say that Saw Volume 2 and I Care Because You Do are both going for a similar feeling of odd and foreboding, and while I do really like Saw Volume 2 and I have a great deal of respect for it, I definitely admire it more than I enjoy it, whereas if I Care Because You Do, I'm far more compelled by it. Much like how Richard showed his face in this album to go against the electric norms of being anonymous, the tunes on here are defined, memorable, and well worth being brought up in the same conversation as the records we're yet to discuss. I would say this is the opinion that loses me the remainder of my internet cred, but if you've seen my Death Grips ranked video, you'll know I have very little internet cred left as it is. 13 years, a lot can happen in that space of time. 13 years ago, Kings of Leon were still relevant, Spotify was but a baby in the tech world, and we had a financial crisis. Thank God that last one never happened again, eh? Whew. Anyway, what can be just as impressive in that time span is what doesn't change, and in 2014, Aphex Twin fans were rewarded for their patience with a release that, while different, was every bit as good as what had come before. I would be hesitant to call any Aphex Twin record predictable or linear, but if I was put at gunpoint and told I had to choose one, then Syro would be right at the back of the mental queue. I feel like the base of Aphex Twin's work has always been warbly and super sentient, but at this point in his career it feels like it was emitting radiation the entire time, and now every component that he's working with is succumbed to the effects and is undergoing those same characteristics. It is just so fascinating, and in Richard's own words,
it can be quite impenetrable for most people because you can't latch onto something. It sounds quite random at first. I'm an erratic person. From setups to actually when I'm doing a track, it's just turning and switching and changing all the time. But there is a method, people just have to take time to work it out.
While I may not be known for my smartiness, I have taken the time to come to grips with Syro and trying to understand the method behind the madness, and it was worth all the revision and receipt reading. I was witness to the very weird promotional campaign behind Syro. I mean, I still remember quite vividly the big blimp in the sky going over London, which so happened to be on my birthday. Very kind of you, Richard. Far, far too kind. And then when you take that into consideration, along with the fact that fans were having to access the dark web in order to get more details about the album, it just feels like Richard himself was just having so much fun teasing fans and just promoting it in all these zany ways. And thankfully, it seems that it was more than just surface level. He was having just as much fun making the music as he was pushing it. Richard has described Syro as his pop album, but it shouldn't come as a shock to anyone that's been in the presence of it. The opener is literally called Mini Pops, and while all the track names come from the equipment used to make them, I don't think I'd be in the wrong for saying that the name could describe the many elements that latch onto you like an acid techno leech. Those window licker-esque vocal loops. The squeaky trilling bass, the drum machine that spits pixelated remnants with every kick, all of it comes together to create one of the most addictive Aphex Twin tracks to date, and one hell of a way to break a decade-long silence. 180 decibels sounds like your calculator just had a mad one, went wild in the town, who is now suffering from the worst hangover ever, a thumping headache, fragile insides just barely keeping themselves together. But I mean that all in a good way. And also it wasn't really until quite recently, and by quite recently I mean like a month ago while researching this video, that Jamie XX didn't in fact sample this song, though it sounds very, very similar. Someone please agree with me. Much like his 2000s output, Richard doesn't just excel solely in bombast, as shown by this track, which, as far as I'm aware, is the closest he's come to creating a song that could be used to serenade someone, up there with Avro 14th, that I have no doubt. The highlights on Syro are just so plentiful, and while I didn't have to go the full ordeal of having the patience of a saint for this record, I very much struggle to think that a fan of Aphex Twin exists that thinks this wasn't worth twiddling your thumbs for, because if I had to wait from now until 2035 for a record that ended up sounding like this, I'd be so impressed. It just does not make sense that this could come from such a wait, but I suppose sense doesn't really factor into an album that's title is literal gobbledygook. For all my hype and for all my praise, this is only the 4th best Aphex Twin album in my opinion, so let's see what that top 3 is looking like, eh? I've always had a struggle trying to review ambient music and trying to get my words about it across, because it's kind of like an eye floater genre for me. If I stare at it too much, then I'm kind of just losing the whole appeal of it, and if I pay too little attention, then it's just gonna lose the appeal and kind of float away from me. It's why I don't tend to review much of it on this channel, because there's just a certain mindset that comes to some people more naturally than it does for me. However, much like a sleeper agent, there's a phrase, or better yet sequence, that will put me in that mindset, and Selected Ambient Works 85 to 92 just so happens to put it at the forefront with opener Extile featuring dusty drums and hypnotising sequencing. There's a sensation that you've come across some long sought after USB drive that you've put into your computer, Extile being the introductory jingle that makes you well aware that what lies beyond is gonna stick with you for a lifetime. And stick with you it will. It could be said this album is to 90s kids what lo-fi hip hop beats to relax / study to is to Gen Z. That's not to say that the album is devoid of detail and quality, or that it's background music. You've seen its ranking, right? You are paying attention. I know myself and many others can attest to the hypnotic quality of Richard D. James' debut album, and how it makes for the perfect study buddy, a pick-me-up that won't give you a caffeine hangover or make you yourself during your higher history exam. That's happened to everyone, right? Right? Despite this being an album experience, there are some songs that, while factoring into that experience, really do kind of stand out and kind of stand on their own legs. I think of Scotch Key 7th Path, I think I'm saying that right? One of the most popular Aphex Twin songs that sounds like the boot up theme for a really like a bootleg computer that you'd buy in a dodgy alley back in like the early 90s. This track and Headfilm helped to give the back end of Saw 85 to 92 an ominous feel, almost as if something isn't right in this world Aphex Twin is crafting, already laying the groundwork for the personality he would shape over the coming decades. Then there's We Are the Music Makers, whose muffled bass gets dipped inch by inch into a basin of water, a quirk that draws me in so much that my face is soaking wet by the end of it. This album turns 30 years old in 2022, and despite the leaps and bounds that the ambient genre has taken since then, the importance and weight of Saw 85 92 is just so undeniable for first time listeners and people that are so familiar with it. There's really not much else to say about it other than if you haven't listened to it, then go listen to it. You're doing yourself such a disservice by letting this one pass you by. And if you have listened to it already, if you're already a huge fan of it, chuck it on. I'm sure you've got like an essay or something due anyway. Give yourself an excuse and just come back to it. Now, I've spent a fair chunk of this video getting my money's worth out my thesaurus in order to avoid just bluntly calling Aphex Twin a weirdo, and if ever there was a period where his eccentric nature had been charged by the glow of a full moon, it was between 1997 and 2000. You had Come to Daddy, a track originally conceived as a heavy metal take that has since taken on an iconic status, partly cause of the music, partly because at the age of 14, nothing had made me quite feel dread the way that music video did and still does. Then there was Window Licker, whose music video replaced the foot in the freaky gas pedal with a breeze block. While it's easily his most commercially successful track to date, it still ranks pretty highly as one of his best songs, especially when it comes to the climax where the caustic window is open, letting in a challenging draft of distortion. Caustic window, I like that, someone should use that as a name. Anyway, after such a prosperous period, the ultimate question has to be, what will the Aphex Twin album that follows all of this sound like? And for my money, the answer is the second best Aphex Twin album. I would be kicking myself if I didn't first mention this interesting tidbit of information, that Richard's fifth album under the Aphex Twin moniker only got released as he'd left an MP3 player full of unreleased material on a plane. Such context might lead you to believe this double album spanning nearly 2 hours would sound something like what you'd heard during the intro of this video, but considering its placement, it's obvious this unfortunate incident had a silver lining to it. Drugs is a difficult one, not class A's, that's from pronunciation, because it's the furthest thing from accessible. There's the aforementioned weighty runtime that spans 30 songs, and there are just tracks on here that even in a post Come to Daddy world are really fucking strange. And don't just take me my word there, here's Richard describing it himself.
Obviously you can't get into that straight away. My sister says it sounds like throwing a drawer of cutlery down the stairs, and I was like, that sounds brilliant.
On the other hand though, if you're looking for an Aphex Twin album that covers all of his movements and sounds while also showing that he's not getting complacent, that he's trying some new stuff, then I don't think there's a more comprehensive introduction to the world of Aphex Twin like Drugs. That's obviously if discovering his music when you're 14 and looking for study music is a bit too pedestrian for you. Do you enjoy Aphex Twin for the quirky teenager who's just discovered what Red Bull is type of energy? Then you'll feel right at home with a song like Omgia Switch 7. Well, as at home as you can be when a track feels like what living in a malfunctioning toaster must be like. How about the more somber, tranquil moments like the one seen on the original selected ambient works? Then Drugs turns up the notch, presenting it in a way that we hadn't seen before, brand spanking new, and when it results in some classics like Avro 14th that not even Chris Rock being horny on main can ruin, then it does make you kind of go, why did it take so long for all of this to bubble to the surface? Though obviously we're no less grateful for finally hearing such beauty like this. And if you're missing the days of Selected Ambient Works Volume 2 and I Care Because You Do and all their ominous foreboding glory, then a track like Quirk 2 is for you, featuring percussion that I imagine Richard had to enter that lucid dream realm of his to get it commissioned by Freddy Krueger, dragging his razor claw glove along some monkey bars. Lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the Moorish AFX, which you may know for its use in Rubber Johnny, an experimental short film by Chris Cunningham who's been at the forefront of the weirdest visuals in music history, including Björk, Autechre and Aphex Twin himself. He was the one behind the aforementioned Come to Daddy and Window Licker, but this one is probably his most haunting and hilarious piece of work.
What the dog doing?
Considering the sheer wealth of work that he's put out, the appeal of an album like Drugs isn't really hard to understand, it's a map for the hard to chronicle mind of Aphex Twin. While not brief in the slightest, manages to compartmentalise everything that I find impressive about him as an artist. There's just something so funny and charming about an album that can bring so much warmth and comfort, also being the same record that produces a line like, "Come on you cunt, let's have some Aphex Acid!" Speaking of Aphex Acid, I don't think any pairing of words could really describe my pick for the best Aphex Twin album better than that. Now, who the fuck is Richard D. James? Given the copious amount of time he'd given himself to work with on previous LPs, the running time never being shorter than 63 minutes, bringing out a record that's just barely over the half-an-hour mark would mess with the winning formula thus far. Maybe this would be cause for concern if RDJ was a conventional Aphex Twin record following in the ambient footsteps of its predecessors, but this is a release unlike anything that had come before, and to this day, after 25 years, very few albums, let alone just electronic releases, have managed what this one does. My first listen to this album was, in a sentence, odd. In a longer sentence, it was very, very odd. I had just never had even a fleeting thought of a song being able to sound the way that the opener 4 does. One that sounded so elegant and beautiful with those stunning strings, yet had those stop and starting drum sequencing and some oddly tuned synths that felt just so off-putting and ominous. The nervous nature of these instrumentals are just as skitterish as I was on my first listen to it, though nowadays 4 is a really odd comfort song to me and gets my favourite Aphex Twin album kicked off in such beautiful, beautiful fashion. Having these two different tones battle it out, resulting in what feels like a soundtrack for a Game Boy Advance cyberpunk RPG, wowed me like nothing before when I first heard it, and to this day it's still one of my favourite opening tracks ever. Also, if I were to ever make a video about my favourite few seconds of music, at 1:33 where it goes, yep. Simple but delightful, and I'm happy to report that this amazement isn't restricted to one track. Whether it's Cornish Acid, which just threatens to morph at a moment's notice, the incredibly composed Girl Boy song, or the closer Logan Rock Witch with its zany slide whistles and just really cool accordion, ensures that the ending to this album is just as memorable as the opener. Richard D. James' album never wastes a second. It intrigues and it impresses as much as it perplexes. While what I've described as eccentric and wild, I'd be a fool to act like it's one that's alienating or too off-putting for newcomers. While To Cure a Weakling Child is the kind of song that, if played for a Victorian child, would definitely cause some sort of horrifying butterfly effect, it's also catchy and delightful as hell, making its inclusion in adverts surprising but not a shock. While I'm not going to argue with Richard on this, I'd say RDJ is his poppiest album, at least nowadays when pop music can pull the rug from underneath you. If you want to debate me on whether Milkman could be the WAP anthem in an alternate timeline, then just give me a time and place. In recent years I've just had a blast chasing my music taste to its roots, to like specific spectacular records. Like Cocteau Twins. Without them I don't feel like I would realise just how beautiful music can be. Previously I thought sounds like theirs would only ever be heard in dreamscapes, and when it comes to like the groundbreaking and experimental, I owe so much to artists like Beastie Boys and Danny Brown and Kanye West, to their kind of magnum opus records. But when it comes to the album that I feel really has shaped my taste in major ways, there's probably like a big three, and one of those three is the RDJ album, and for me and for everyone else that I've said so far, that is why this is the best Aphex Twin album for my money. What's next for Richard then? In various interviews he's gone on about how he's constantly making music, more for himself, with ambitions for EPs and albums being a secondary thought. If one thing is for sure, there's new Aphex Twin music being made as we speak. That there is no doubt, considering just how much music he's put out there under the Aphex Twin name and other monikers. It's not like Richard has left us parched for content. And there we have it, every Aphex Twin album ranked. Let me know what your ranking is, what you made of mine, and what the square root of 144 is down in the comments below. If there's an artist that you'd like me to cover in this series, then also let me know that down in the comments. And a friendly reminder that there is a Spotify playlist in the description, which includes a lot of the tracks that I've mentioned in this video, along with some other favourites that I didn't have the time to include. Thank you so much to Ollie, otherwise known as Deep Cuts, for his voiceover contributions for this video. His Aphex Twin guide was a huge help out, and if you haven't checked out that video or his channel, then please do so, because I owe him a lot. Thank you again, my man. Big shout out again to my wonderful patrons that do support me and got to see this video a day or so early for £1 a month. I will be getting some new lighting and hopefully a new audio interface in the coming months, and that's thanks to them. So both financially and emotionally, you guys help a lot, and I really do appreciate it. I'll catch you all in the next one. As always, stay safe and stay hydrated, and in the immortal robotic words of Zygomatic 17,
thank you for your attention. Bye.